5 years ago today, on October 23rd, 2020, I released my debut feature film, Another Day Closer to the Sun. It was a complete disaster. Not in the fun cult classic way, but it was just flat out bad, both from an actual movie standpoint, but also from a behind-the-scenes production standpoint. However, it also changed my life. I'm still grateful I made it, because without that failure, I honestly don't know where I'd be right now as a creator, as a filmmaker, or even as a human being. This video is going to be a retrospective on Another Day Closer to the Sun, though it's going to differ from my usual retrospectives that you've seen on this channel. Instead of analyzing someone else's movie, I'll be reflecting on my own. I've made 4 feature films since then, and I think it'd be really interesting to revisit each one of them on their 5-year anniversaries, to look back, talk about what went right and what went wrong, as well as how each film shaped the next stage of my creative life. Another Day Closer to the Sun began as a dream. One hot summer night, I had a dream that the sun was getting closer to the Earth, and all we could do was stand back and watch in terror as it entered the upper atmosphere. I woke up in a cold sweat and immediately wrote the idea down in a Google Docs file on my phone. I had absolutely no idea that I would actually make this into a movie. At that point in my life, I would just kind of write miscellaneous ideas down in that Google Doc. Not to mention, at that point in my life, I was going through a pretty bad creative rut. I hadn't made a movie for a couple of years, and at this point, I hadn't released a short film since middle school. Granted, you could barely even call these films, but it is what it is. I had just scrapped plans to make a horror feature film titled Town of Smiles. It would have been rather similar to 1973's The Wicker Man in terms of plot and pacing. However, we just couldn't get the project made because one of the lead actresses was going out of state for college, and we weren't able to film her scenes in time. I had written the character specifically for her, and as it turns out, for better or for worse, this is something that I tend to do a lot. Regardless, I had lost all motivation, and I had lost hope that I would ever make another movie in my life. I was just stuck in this endless cycle of coming up with an idea, telling my friends about it, getting them on board, writing the script, maybe filming a scene or two, and then just starting another project, abandoning the previous one. I had been doing this for years and I was sick of it. I was getting really anxious to make an actual feature before graduating high school. So, in September 2019, during my junior year, I finally found the motivation to begin work on Firewood, a 2-minute short film. This was my first short film that I had actually released since middle school, and I was eager to start another project after that one was done. Ironically enough, it was that 2019 short film that would become the namesake of this very channel. Looking through my film idea document on Google Docs, I decided to make Another Day Closer to the Sun, and that it would be a short film. The first draft of the script was around 12 pages, which roughly would have equated to about 12 minutes of film runtime. However, I really wanted to make my first feature, and I liked the concept, so I decided to just make it into a feature. Not knowing any better, the feature film screenplay was only 33 pages in total. At the time, I didn't really know the rule of thumb of 1 page equals 1 minute, so I figured this would be more than adequate in order to create a feature-length film. That's mistake number 1. Here's the second one. Before I could start filming, I obviously needed a cast. I spent about a week asking around, and I eventually found the cast except for one crucial piece: the main character, Scott. I had no clue who would play the lead role. After another week of unsuccessfully trying to find someone willing to spend hours and hours acting in this movie, I realized that I had no other option than to just play the role myself. While I did act on stage throughout high school, I don't consider myself to be an actor. I'm a filmmaker first and foremost. I feel extremely comfortable being behind the camera instead of in front of it. So instead of just waiting and finding the right person, I bit the bullet and moved forward with casting myself as the lead, while also being the director, the writer, the editor, the director of photography, the composer, and everything in between. This is way too much work for one person, but I assumed that I could just do it alone. Nowadays, I've learned to let go and split up the work more, which has resulted in much better movies. Film is a collaborative medium after all. Filming for Another Day Closer to the Sun began on December 23rd, 2019, in the middle of a freezing Wisconsin winter. My brother Luke was behind the camera, and I was reluctantly in front of it. At that point, we didn't entirely know what kind of movie we were making. Sure, there was a script, but it was mostly bare bones. A lot of scenes were just described with lines like, "Scott walks in the field," and that was it. The idea was to capture a fly-on-the-wall, almost documentary-style realism, something that felt like you were right there with him, just existing in the moment. The problem was, we didn't really have the experience or the equipment to make that idea work. The handheld camera was just way too shaky, the shots were inconsistent, and I was freezing the entire time. The flannel I wore ended up becoming my character's main outfit purely out of necessity. I didn't plan it, it just stuck. For the gearheads wondering what gear I used on this project, well, I used a Nikon D5600. This camera cost me about $500 back in 2018, 2019, around then. And ironically enough, this is still the camera that I use in all of my YouTube videos. Yes, that's it. That's the camera, the one that I've been using for YouTube vlogs and retrospectives I tried to make a movie on. For a mic, I didn't really use a mic. I just kind of used the onboard camera and then ADR'd everything. Later down the line, I ended up using this really crappy boom mic. It was garbage. I spent 20 bucks on it on Amazon. It was terrible. The tripod that we used for this movie was from World War II. It was my grandpa's. So yeah, we really weren't working with the best gear, but gear isn't everything. When you got grit, you can make whatever you want. And well, we pushed forward. By February 2020, Joe, one of my co-stars, had filmed one of the few dialogue-heavy scenes that were in the movie, and this is a dinner table conversation. It was one of the rare moments where things actually went smoothly. But then, March 2020 hit. The pandemic shut everything down, and suddenly I couldn't film with anyone else. So I started rewriting the script to accommodate isolation. I added more scenes of Scott wandering through empty spaces, and gradually the film transformed into something lonelier and more abstract. That's why there are just so many shots of him walking around. It was not the original plan, but it became the backbone of the entire movie. I tried my best to divide these walking sequences into 3 symbolic sections: life, purgatory, and death. The movie essentially evolved as I filmed it, with scenes constantly being rewritten and restructured all the way through editing. I mean, I would literally just bring my camera outside and go, let's try to just shoot some scenes that don't actually exist. They're not in the script, but let's try to figure something out. And most of the time, it would be just me. I would set the camera down on the tripod, film myself in front of it, and then act it out and then move on to the next shot. To make it seem like there was someone holding the camera, I would then have a fake sort of handheld camera shake effect in Premiere Pro. The biggest change came with the ending, and I think now is a good time to kind of explain the plot of the movie. The film follows Scott, who is played by me, and he deals with the impending end of the world as the sun is gradually moving closer and closer towards the Earth. However, at the same time, he's still dealing with familial problems between him, his dad, and his brother. So he goes up to their old family home in Rhinelander and acts as a squatter of sorts until his brother Joe finds him and tries to get him to come back home. He doesn't. Scott ends up meeting with some people, reminiscing on his past, and finally the world is wiped out by the sun. End of movie. You may be thinking, that's pretty boring. To that I would say, yes, it totally is. The ending was way different. Originally, Joe was supposed to return in the final act to confront Scott one last time. The brothers would argue, things would escalate, and Scott would ultimately shoot Joe before dragging his body to the truck, burning it. It would have been an intense and disturbing ending. It was this violent culmination of everything Scott was going through. But when I looked at what we had, it just felt completely out of nowhere. The script hadn't earned that moment, and I knew my acting couldn't carry that kind of emotional weight without it coming across as unintentionally funny. I still think about that ending sometimes, though. A part of me wishes I'd just taken the risk and gone for it, even if it would have turned out really messy and potentially terrible, even worse than the movie as is. The shot of the truck burning was really cool. Unfortunately, I don't have it anymore, but long story short, it was a model of the exact pickup truck that I had owned at the time. We poured propane on it, lit it on fire, and then I filmed it in slow motion and in time-lapse, and then kind of combined the two. It was really awesome, and I wish I still had that footage. Why I don't, I'll go over later in the video. So let's talk about the editing process, because I experimented a lot with structure, and I actually edited the film while I was filming it. I would shoot a scene, immediately edit it, and then it would be done that day. Very efficient, but also very sloppy, and it's why the film has a very messed up pace. Structurally, flashbacks were constantly being moved around to improve pacing and avoid a repetitive rhythm of alternating between now and then. Eventually, I decided to make all the flashbacks look black and white, a choice that was heavily inspired by the film American History X, since I loved how that film used the format to distinguish time while still feeling fluid and cohesive. Visually and tonally, Another Day Closer to the Sun was heavily influenced by 3 films that left a huge mark on me. The first was Gus Van Sant's Last Days. I saw it for the first time around that period, and it was life-changing. The quiet, meandering pacing, the long, unbroken shots of someone just existing. It showed me that I didn't have to rush to make a story meaningful. The second influence was A Ghost Story, which completely redefined how I thought about mood and tone. That film's sense of existential dread and its depiction of time dissolving into memory was exactly what I wanted to tap into. And finally, At Eternity's Gate shaped how I approached the camera work. The way that film observes movement, the close-ups of feet trudging through the grass, the painterly handheld energy, directly influenced how I shot Scott running through the woods. Looking back, I wish I had been a bit more subtle about it, but at the time these homages were my way of saying thank you to the films that inspired me. We officially wrapped filming on May 29th, 2020, and it felt strangely anticlimactic. This was supposed to be my first feature film, and it was over. By that point though, I had already been deep into pre-production on my next feature, Pesticide, which we then shot in July of that same year, not even a month after the fact. So ultimately, finishing my first feature film didn't feel like the end of a chapter, but really a midpoint. It was like I was barely scratching the surface of what I wanted and needed to do. I edited the film right up until its release on October 23rd, 2020, my 18th birthday. We didn't hold a premiere or anything. Instead, some friends and I got together and ate cake in my garage as the film debuted on YouTube. Whenever people at school would ask me about it or give me props, I would always say the same thing. Thanks, but my next movie is going to be even better. In retrospect, I definitely came off as being a douche for saying that, even if it was true in the end. See, you might have noticed that there's barely any behind-the-scenes footage in this retrospective, and I've mainly been sourcing clips from the actual movie itself. That's because I deleted almost everything. After releasing the movie, I needed hard drive space for Pesticide, my second feature film, and I wasn't happy with how Another Day Closer to the Sun turned out. So, in a moment of pure teenage frustration and angsty grief, I wiped all the raw files, deleted scenes, alternate takes, everything. The only surviving pieces are a few outtakes that I happened to back up elsewhere on a Google shared drive on my school account. What you're seeing here is all that remains. There's a lot about this project that I deeply regret, but deleting all the original files is probably my biggest regret of the bunch. I sort of got lost in the sauce, to put it bluntly. I cared more about how I was feeling specifically at that time, and not how I would feel in the future. I wish I could see the footage of me making this movie again. I wish I could go back and see my friends again in this specific point in my life, my senior year of high school. That's gone now, and all that remains is what's in the movie, and most of it is me. That kind of breaks my heart to think about.
Just come home, man. I don't have a home to come home to. Bullshit!
That was the worst fucking line ever. I don't have a home to come home to. What's my line? Like, what's my response to that?
Looking back, Another Day Closer to the Sun is a project that I really feel deeply conflicted about. On one hand, it's my first feature film, and that's something to be proud of. I mean, that's a crazy accomplishment for an 18-year-old. But on the other hand, I think it represents so much missed potential. It was born out of passion and uncertainty, but it was guided by instinct more than skill. I was more worried about how I would be perceived by people as opposed to just telling a good story and taking risks. It marks the exact point, though, of where I started figuring out who I was as a filmmaker. Even though it failed in almost every way, it laid the groundwork for everything I've made since. A little over a year later, I ended up revisiting this movie, and I recut it. I took the 60-minute feature film version, and I removed all the fluff. All killer, no filler. It's about 12 minutes, and this version I really like. This is the version I revisit the most. You're more than welcome to check out the feature film version. Both versions are available on this channel, but I will link the short film version here if you want to see it, but there's a Firewood Media 101 playlist right there. You can click that, and you can go check out the feature film version as it is in that playlist as well. It's also publicly on the channel, so feel free to go check out both versions if you want, or not. I don't care, I'm not your dad. I'm Cole McCormick, you're watching Firewood Media. Thank you so much to channel members for supporting videos just like these. I've got some really awesome projects in the works, so stay tuned for that. One of them is, in fact, a short film that should be out on Halloween if all goes according to plan. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.